I'll admit everybody.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Can someone who's just joined us just put a thumbs up or shout out that they can hear me okay, and if you can see the slide? Amazing. Right, great stuff. I'm going to give it 1 or 2 minutes because we've got 65 people who have expressed interest in joining. So we'll just give it another minute, see if that number count goes up, and then we shall shortly make a start. Okay. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to make a start now. A little bit of housekeeping. Hopefully, a few more people will join us. I think I've just had an internal chat that one of our colleagues is struggling to join. I don't know if you've got the correct link again, so we'll have to follow that up shortly. But yeah, amazing to have all of you on this webinar on episode number 2 of a 5-part series. This is sponsored by the CIOB and the ISPE, and it's focused on raising awareness on diversity within the workplace. Next slide, please. So just a brief recap, and anyone who didn't join us in the first episode, but Chartered Institute of Building, we're a very large global community of over 50,000 strong members, predominantly operating in across a full broad spectrum of a built environment. We have a corporate plan which uses a tagline, modern professionalism. Now, being associated to our institute and abiding by its bylaws and CPD commitments, we really want to drive innovation in a sustainable manner, but also be inclusive and ethical in accordance with our EDI policies as well. So if you just look at the bottom left of the slide, you'll see strengthen the talent pool across the industry. That's to satisfy the red dot on the right hand side of the slide, which is to satisfy the skills gap. Okay, so we want to do that in a quality way to get the best athletes and best people into our sector and to retain them. And we think by raising our awareness on this important subject, we will keep and attract new talent. Next slide, please. Chris, I don't know if you can come off mute or if you're having some issues. Right, so I've just had an input from Chris. We've just got a bit of an issue there with the Chris's accessibility to speak. So Chris is on the call. He's associated with the ISPE, and again, they're a very large non-profit organisation, been around for over 35 years with over 20,000 members, and again, they're predominantly operating in the pharma space, but as we all know, built environment and life sciences, from construction, healthcare into pharmaceuticals, we're all part of the same industry really, but we think that the skill sets from a diverse population really do benefit people who work in that sector specifically, and within the pharmaceutical one. So that's the overview of the ISPE. Next slide, please. Okay, back to the corporate plan. again, we recognise that there's such a large skill shortage across the globe. That's in life sciences, traditional construction, residential, and everything. And again, that workforce, we haven't got a very broad spectrum of demographics and diverse thinking. So we want to bring people in from different backgrounds to leverage that strength. Next slide, please. Just bring it closer to home. The CITB have recognised for us to hit our obligations for our customers and clients that we need nearly quarter of a million construction workers by 2027. A large proportion of that will be operating in the our sectors into the life sciences and pharmaceutical industry as well. So we need to attract more talent and make sure our talent doesn't leave into other fields as well. Next slide, please. Just drill a bit more context there. Only 14% of people in the construction sector are women, and then you're looking at ethnicities. Only 6% come from different backgrounds, and similarly, only 6% declare a disability, whether that's a seen disability or a hidden disability like neurodivergence normally presents. So again, we feel that to bring that talent pool up, we need to sort of focus on some of these other minorities and sectors to harness the talent. Next slide, please. There's a really amazing survey's been conducted by the National Federation of Builders and the CITB. What it clearly shouts out is 1 in 4 construction workers consider themselves to be neurodivergent, with only 17% of that receiving a formal diagnosis. So what it's suggesting is our neurodivergent population in the construction life sciences sector is actually higher because we're an attractive, exciting industry, and it seems to be like a moth to a flame for some of these neurodivergent individuals. Next slide, please. And again, this just demonstrates that we can pull people in. We're attractive for the neurodivergent population. We just need to make sure that the conditions that we create for them to work in allows them to shine and work to the best of their abilities. That's not only in designing and creating amazing workspaces for organisations and their workforce to collaborate to the best of their abilities. We've got to make sure that when we're building it, our workers also aren't impacted negatively by that experience. So we really want to make sure that we think outside the box and make sure that our construction sites, for example, are considerate of our diverse population. Next slide, please. This is an overview of the series and the episodes to date. So we had some amazing insight from Sunaina week before last on an introduction to neurodiversity. And what we're looking at now is drilling down into certain sectors. So we're looking at ADHD today. In a couple of weeks, we've got a focus on autism. And we've got a really interesting discussion on dyslexia and how the build environment will, how we can design the build environment to satisfy all of its occupants. And then we'll wrap up with a bit of a segue into still attracting talent, but we're looking slightly different into the ex-forces personnel, because there's a lot of good work and good advocates in that space as well. Right, next slide. I think this is my final one. Yeah. So before I hand over to Paul and introduce him, I just want to give an overview of what specifically ADHD is. Paul will give a lived experience and a bit more into the detail, but formally, it's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and it's a neurological condition, And there's 3 types of ADHD now, categories, You have a predominantly inattentive presentation. Now, ironically, I got diagnosed with that on Friday last week, and I hadn't given it any attention up until 12 months ago. So I've actually got predominantly inattentive ADHD. There's predominantly hyperactive, which is what the general population think ADHD is. Kids in classrooms can't sit still, running around, but that's obviously hyperactivity demonstrated by behaviours and impulsivity rather than thoughts and having that going on in your brain rather than demonstrated physically. And then a combined presentation, which is by far the most common, and that is a bit of a mixed bag. You have a bit of both. Okay, what it is it's not a mental illness yet, and it's not a behavioural disorder. It's not even a learning disability, but ADHD is a developmental difference in our brain self-management system. So it is wired up differently. But if you've met one person with ADHD, you've met one person with ADHD, or, no two people are the same. They're a blend across the three types and some different strengths and challenges in different areas. So that's the overview of ADHD. I hope, if anything, you can take that away today. But it's my pleasure now to hand over to Paul, who's going to take the slides now into his lived experience in his career to date. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Lee. Can you hear me okay? Perfect. Did I just see a hand come up? Sorry, I've got the presentation view. So is there a question before we fire into this?
No, I think if we've got time, we'll open it at the end.
Okay,
I'll see if there's anything in the chat. Yeah.
Great stuff. So, hi everybody, I'm Paul. I guess what I'm going to start with, if it's okay, is a bit of a disclaimer. I'm not an expert in ADHD. This is not medical advice. It's just, me sharing my lived experience of having ADHD. And if you do think that you need some support, then, go and talk to a professional. You'll get far more out of it than talking to me. So what you can see on the screen now, this ducks and squirrels thing, is actually a poster that my wife bought for me, and she thought was hilarious. But it does kind of describe the ADHD brain. That there's no ducks, there's no rows, it's just squirrels that are all over the place. And it just certainly made me chuckle anyway. So let's press on. What I'm going to try and cover today is a little bit of an introduction to me and my reflections on how I saw ADHD a couple of years ago, I guess. A bit of a brief timeline of my life and the impact of ADHD. I'll talk a bit about diagnosis and how that works and next steps. I'll share how ADHD presents itself for me and how I deal with that, and talk a little bit about how it's simultaneously a superpower and kryptonite at the same time. Then I'll start to reflect a little bit more widely to you guys as leaders and managers and families of people who may be ADHD and neurodivergent, about how we can create more inclusive environments. And then I will shut up and let you guys ask questions and open up for discussion. So a little bit about me. So I'm 54, 55 soon. I'm married to Karen. We've been together 30 odd years now. Dad's two boys. Eddie's 25. He's an economist. I didn't even know that was a proper job until a couple of years ago. My youngest is at uni studying logistics and supply chain. The little dog that I was a slave to sadly died a couple of weeks ago. So I've been emancipated from that, but the pitch still makes me smile, so I've left her on. I've got a bundle of qualifications. I've got a master's degree in pharmaceutical engineering. I've got a first class honours degree in control engineering. I've got HNCs, ONCs. I'm a chartered engineer and a fellow of the Institute of Engineering and Technology. And probably the hardest one of all those qualifications was the 3 O-levels that I left school with. I currently work in AstraZeneca with Lee and a few others on the call as a master planning lead, which is a great little job for me because it kind of needs me to work with a variety of different roles in the organisation to try and piece that information together from supply chain and sites and utilities and amenities and volume of product growth and product introductions, and try and piece all that together into kind of long-term strategic real estate plans. Engineer by trade, started off as an apprentice. If you've got really good eyesight, you'll spot me in that middle photo. And I've had a number of roles all the way from that up to site engineering equivalent. So in my own time, as is the want of people with ADHD. I've got a real endorphin-seeking nature, so I like to go down hills quickly on my mountain bike and on my snowboard, and I do like the occasional dust up on the mats in my martial arts. So, and I tell you all of that not because I kind of want us to get, to create a wow moment. It's more to give you a sense that ADHD doesn't define you. It doesn't mean you have to be your life has to be a car crash. What it does need is support. What it also needs, certainly in my case, is more than a grain of luck. So, the more help people can get with ADHD, the more successful their outcome's likely to be. So I reflected on how I saw ADHD up until a few years ago. My first thought was, growing up in the 70s wasn't even a thing. It wasn't, it just didn't exist, and it was just naughty kids and it was poor parenting, and that's now I've been diagnosed and I understand it better, what a terrible bias to have. And certainly that diagnosis has really made me question a lot of the biases I might have in my life, and learn to be more tolerant and understanding, rather than just kind of prejudge. So yeah, that's how I viewed it. So I'm not going to talk you through all of these points on here, but you can kind of see kind of how my life has panned out. What I'm going to draw out is kind of a few highs and lows in there. So, started off, I grew up in with a family. We were part of the exit from Liverpool into Newtown, so we moved into Runcorn. And at the time, there was 5 adults in the house: my mum and dad, my grandparents, my auntie, only one of them working. So we were financially not that well off, but as a kid, I was well off in every other respect. I had the time of everybody. I had a lot of love, a lot of nurture. Amazing time to grow up. Once I got to school, when you think about school and what that does for you, it tries to give you a rounded education. But what ADHD does is gives you an interest-based attention. So what that means is stuff that you're really interested in, you'll engage with, and you'll probably be very good at. The stuff that you're not interested in, you're not going to touch. And the fact that kids are made to have that rounded education where we study sciences and we study geographies and histories and kind of humanitarian subjects and English and maths, does mean that, certainly in my case, your education, half of it goes missing because you're not interested and it doesn't hold your attention. And what that meant was that I had acquired a number of labels through my school life. I was lazy, I was a daydreamer, I was disruptive, I was put on the naughty table, I was told I'd never amount to anything. My favourite school report quote was that I had a lively personality that often eclipsed my work. So school life wasn't great. I left with, funnily enough, exactly the amount of O levels I needed to start my apprenticeship, which I loved. I was all of a sudden I'm just doing things that I like to do. I've got some fantastic teachers to help me understand my trade as an instrument artificer. And I finished that apprenticeship with the highest HNC marks for the college for an engineering subject. So I went from bottom of the class to top of the class because I was interested, I was engaged, and people were stimulating me in the right ways through that apprenticeship period. So I'm still with that. I should have said that was with ICI over at Runcorn. I then shifted jobs just as I finished my apprenticeship to become a trainee designer. I was lucky enough to be sent to do a part-time degree in there. And around that time, we were looking to, ICI engineering was demerged as Zenica left ICI, and all the money disappeared with it. And we became UTech and had ambitions to become a consultancy. So we brought a guy in who set up that consultancy, and he made us do everybody in the organisation do a load of tests, one of which was a diverse thinking test. I was summoned to his office not long after, and I'm a 21-year-old lad at this time, since the carpeted corridor, and I'm thinking all kinds of disasters. And what he shared with me was that he'd never seen a score as high as mine on that diverse thinking test, and so he had a challenge for me that every time they got a job that they didn't have an obvious technical solution for, he wanted me to go along and just spout out whatever came into my head and to work with other people on developing their ideas. And it worked really well. There were people in there who we kind of latched onto each other. I blurted out a load of ideas, some of them caught, and it worked really well. And I call it out because this guy, ADHD wasn't a thing. He didn't know about it. I certainly didn't know I had it. But what he knew from that test was that I was wired differently. And what he did was embrace it and put it to good use. So a fantastic application of engaging the neurodivergence and making best use of it in a way that rewards both the individual and the organisation. I'll fast forward to a kind of opposite to that, where I had a manager. I don't know if you guys have heard of Belbin. And it's kind of models of people in teams, and I was very clearly a plant. If anybody's aware of the Belbin types, and that means I'm full of ideas and full of energy, but I'm probably quite unlikely to finish any of them. And somebody said to me, "I'm going to make a completer finisher out of you yet." Which, if I'm going to be overly dramatic about it, is a bit akin now, reflect on it, to having somebody who's on crutches tell them that they're going to be joining the 400-meter team. Something that certainly is unlikely to go well for anybody, and it's going to cause quite a lot of anguish. So I'll kind of leave that timeline there. There's loads of other details in there you can read, but kind of highs and lows of being really engaged and encouraged and supported and in something I'm interested in got loads out of me, and then the kind of making me do things that aren't in my wheelhouse had quite the opposite effect. So you'll notice at the end of that line, it finishes with diagnosis. So I'm conscious that not everybody will understand what the ADHD diagnosis is. So let's talk about that for a bit. And what I'm going to start with is, I've read it in the papers, so you guys will have done as well, the papers, social media, whatever. But there's like this kind of sense that all of a sudden ADHD, there's some kind of epidemic that everybody's getting diagnosed. And I reflected on that, and I thought, I wonder if, 100 years ago when glasses became a thing, did everybody all of a sudden then think that there was an epidemic of short-sightedness? When actually what there was access to the proper assessments and the equipment and the know-how and understanding the science behind what's going on. So I don't think there's, increased prevalence of ADHD or neurodiversity. I just think there's a better understanding of it and, more accessible ways to diagnose that. So it's not a simple process. It's not something you can buy with 10 tokens off the back of a box of Kellogg's. You do need to go through a lengthy process. For me, it started with a GP and a conversation with him. I was then there are a number of questionnaires. Some went to my parents, so to understand what I was like as a kid. We dug out all my old school reports. That's where I found the my personality eclipsing my work comment. My wife was asked to complete some kind of, what it's like to live with me and how I behave, and then some self-assessments as well. There was a number of meetings with psychologists, psychiatrists, and one thing that was interesting for me is, it's not something that comes across you all of a sudden. it needs to be present in childhood for you to be diagnosed with ADHD. And if you reflect back to Lee's earlier slide, I have a combined presentation, so I'm both inattentive and hyperactive, which interestingly, to Lee's point earlier as well, doesn't mean that I'm running around doing wall of death around the walls of a room, but there are elements of what I do that are indicative of hyperactivity. But it's certainly not running around, certainly not at my age anyway. So post that that assessment and the diagnosis, I went and joined some education groups and support groups to learn more about it, and I have a little WhatsApp group with some other ADHDers, and we talk about all kinds of stuff, and some of it's quite irrelevant, as you might expect from a group of ADHDers. But that's really helpful for me to help me understand it better. I think as I understand it better and understood it better, I did go through a period of mourning, if I'm honest. I think you do wonder if ADHD had been better understood when I was a kid and I got better support through school, what might it have been like then? So you do kind of, mourning might sound dramatic, but it did feel like a period of mourning for me. I am now medicated. That's been going for a couple of months, and I take stimulants, which sounds a little bit counterproductive for somebody who is hyperactive. But what they stimulate is brain activity, the kind of the connection that helps your focus and your inattentive piece. It certainly helps me with periods of prolonged focus now, which might have lasted a few minutes previously. Finally, because I understand it, I'm now a little bit more forgiving of myself, and I'm probably wanting to make myself better understood. It doesn't excuse all of my behaviours, I understand that, but at least you might understand why I do some of the things that I do. And as I say, I'm 55 in a few weeks, and I'm starting to think about spending more time on beaches and less time behind a desk, and starting to reflect about what's the legacy, how do I want to what might be my lasting impact, and I would like it to be about starting to normalise neurodiversity and neurodivergence. So, in terms of what ADHD looks like, you can see 3 columns there. So the first column is what a psychologist or a book might call a symptom. The middle column is how it presents, what it means to me, and the third column is what do I do to kind of help manage that better. So the first part there is about executive function. So ADHD will cause you to have a poor working memory. Short-term memory is not great. Long-term memory, surprisingly, is very good. I can remember every name of the kid on the picture of my first year in school, but I can't remember somebody's name that was given to me 20 minutes ago. Planning and organisation can be an issue. I definitely lose my thread if I'm having a conversation. That's a very common theme with me, particularly in interviews. Interviews are horrible because I chase 100 squirrels and catch none of them and then lose what the question was. How do I manage it? It used to be in notebooks. I've gone all electronic and cool now. So, I use Microsoft To Do. I use to kind of capture any things that I need to remember to do. I keep all my notes in OneNote and try and keep that organized. I love a spreadsheet. I do something called time blocking. I don't know if that's a familiar term to everybody, but basically, if I know I have an activity to do, I will allocate time in my diary for me to do that, and I try and remain disciplined to make sure I use that time slot to do that activity. And I do love a process. I'm working in an organisation that's driving hard on lean. I love a bit of lean, so that works really well for me as well. Prioritization can be an issue. If you give somebody with ADHD a big list of things to do, they'll spend a lot of time procrastinating and trying to pick which one to go at, and generally what will happen is you'll come up against a deadline, and that will then drive you to go into what they call, what would psychologists would call hyperfocus. So you kind of disappear down a rabbit hole, and you'll turn out a big pile of work in a super short time because that's the way your ADHD brain works. To help me with that, I block the first hour of every day out for prep. I use the Eisenhower matrix. I don't know if it's kind of the important, urgent, four-box model. So kind of think about, well, what's important and urgent, the things I definitely have to do today, and also what's the important, not so urgent, kind of those planning activities, and where are they going to fit in. But time blocking definitely helps with that. Interest-based attention, we talked about that already, and kind of the impact that had on me on school. So I will focus on what interests me far more than probably what's important. I've got loads of ideas. It's unlikely I'll finish, half of them. And you do go through something called either hyperfixation or hyperfocus. So sometimes if somebody with ADHD gets a new hobby, they'll go and buy every single conceivable thing they need to do that hobby, and it could be dead to them within 4 weeks. That's the hyperfixation piece. Hyperfocus, I've already talked about, it's kind of just like disappearing into a hole while you're doing something, generally something that's very interesting, and pulling out of that can be a challenge as well. So how do I deal with that? The stuff that doesn't interest me, I break down, I time block that out. I try and think back from the end point to what I need to do to achieve that, and put that time in my diary. And I intersperse that with the stuff that's probably not as important, but I like to do. So I kind of give myself little breaks there. This is an interesting one for me. The next one, rejection sensitive dysphoria, or RSD. Never heard of it before, but really struck a chord with me. So it's the feelings of low self-esteem, a lot of self-doubt, particularly if you feel criticized or rejected. And I deal with that quite badly, if I'm honest. It leads me to be a people pleaser. I'll do more that, I'll try to be ahead of something, so I'd give people less opportunity to criticize me. It also means I deal with it with a lot of self-deprecating humour, because then it feels like I'm in charge of the conversation, of criticising me rather than other people. Inattention, so we talked about my combined presentation. So I would do struggle sometimes to listen or to concentrate if it doesn't interest me. So going back to that interest-based attention, chewing and eating was kind of, if my mouth was moving, I could concentrate better. That might not make a lot of sense, but it worked for me. But that became a huge problem for me. Other people self-medicate with alcohol or even worse. That resulted in me at one point weighing nearly 25 stone because I was eating to try and concentrate. I didn't recognize it. I just thought I was, and it wasn't a hunger thing. It was just a sensation thing. Thankfully I managed to get better at that, and since lost 11 stone, but it's still something that I have to focus on. Medication definitely helps with that inattentive piece as well. Hyperactivity. So I said before, it doesn't mean that I run around the rules screaming and waving my arms about, but I do something that a psychologist would call stimming or stimulating. So I will fiddle with things. I'll click pens. I will eat things. I will, I'm always looking for stuff to do. Again, not great at that. The medication definitely helps. And things like fidget cubes and things like that help me just to kind of occupy my hands or my feet or whatever it is that kind of allows me to concentrate. I'm impulsive. I will interrupt you. I will finish your sentences. If somebody's got a stammer, that's awful, because it's horrible for them because they don't get a chance to say what they're saying. I'm trying to second guess it because I'm not good at that. I'm a little bit, that impulsivity can be a bit, well, let's just see what happens. Sounds all right, let's do it. And I'm really terrible at silences. Anybody who's ever met me will know that I just can't do it, and I will talk all kinds of nonsense just to not sit there in silence. How do I manage that? So to stop me from interrupting and finishing your sentences, I will have to write down what's on my mind. And the reason I want to interrupt you isn't because I'm rude. I know it's rude, but if I don't say it in the moment, I will definitely forget. So writing that down means that I will remember what I wanted to say. But also, if I'm really honest, I'm probably not listening to you anymore until I've said that thing. So sometimes it's helpful for me to interrupt you, then I can concentrate again. And I do try and explain myself to people and let them understand that, that's just something, that's the way I am. Maintaining social relationships is an interesting one. I don't have a huge circle of friends. I've got, the same group of friends that I've had for most of my life. And what's interesting is, I love them all dearly, but I might not call them for weeks. And in my mind, there's absolute continuity with how I feel about them and where I think our relationship's at. But of course, if you don't have ADHD and you've not heard from me from 2 months, you'll think I'm not your mate anymore and I don't care. But in my mind, it's as fresh today as it was the last time I spoke to you. How I maintain that is my wife's great. She'll say, "Have you rung your mum this week?" Or, "When's last, have you spoken to so and so?" So she's good at that. WhatsApp's great because I can just ping all my mates and have conversations that way. And every Thursday, whether I want to or not, I go out with the same group of mates I've had for 40 odd years, and we go and have a beer and a chat and a curry or whatever else it is. So, just that regularity and, using some of those tools and having a wife that prods me helps me maintain that. Internal restlessness for me, presents itself most of them trying to go to sleep. You're just laying there and your brain all of a sudden, the squirrels jump up and run round and, or I can be watching a film and I'll say, well, what have I seen that actor in and where was that location filmed and how long would it take me to drive there and where would I park and, all those kind of things. And that you miss the film because you're busy Googling all that information, but for me, mostly it's when I'm trying to go to sleep. So I try and distract myself with podcast, ASMR. I can't remember what that stands for, but it's kind of like, rainforest noises or waterfalls or something, or TV. It kind of needs to be noise, but not stimulating noise, if that makes sense. It's usually helpful if it's a program I've seen before, so I'm not bothered about missing it. I know what's going on. And it's just kind of, allowing my brain to focus on something that's not a load of nonsense of, where was a certain film made. And sometimes, I just feed the squirrels. If I'm thinking about something, it's easier for me to just sit up, Google the thing, get the answer, then my brain will relax. Finally, there's something about sensory processing. So, easily distracted by noise. I can't remember what I was saying before, if any of you seen the film Up and the dog that can talk, he'll be halfway through a conversation, he'll say, "Squirrel," and he'll look over and, he's off on something else. I'm a bit like that. Sometimes if something looks like it's interesting texture, I want to touch it. I'm a very visual thinker, so if I'm deep in conversation with you and engaged, I won't be making eye contact because I'm looking to the side here and I'm kind of picturing what you're saying and thinking about what I'm going to say next and shaping that up. So how do I manage that? I have some AirPods and I put them on noise cancelling mode, so I'm less triggered by little things I might hear around the office. I have fidget cubes and pens and things like that. I try not to annoy people with, but just keep my hands busy. And if I've never worked with you before and we're having a conversation, I'll probably just explain that eye contact thing. That actually, it's not that I'm not disinterested; it's quite the opposite. Okay, so then I thought, well, I wanted to be like super positive, and it's a superpower. It's not it's not a disability. It's an enabling enability, whatever the word is. But that's not entirely true. I think I listened to a podcast that says if about ADHD, and they ask at the end whether if you could, you'd get rid of it, and I don't think I would. and partly because the list on the left is bigger than the list on the right. So, things that make it my superpower, you know, I've got a very divergent brain. It will think of a million ideas, and I really like that. It's kind of, it's really quick for me. It's very natural. I enjoy doing it. And I also am very good, and it's not just me, it seems to be an ADHD thing about bringing together a number of seemingly unrelated issues and forming into a coherent picture. You know, I'm a fast thinker. I will make decisions quickly, and ADHD people, and I definitely bear this one up, are most happy when it's near chaos, when everything's going off and it's super busy. That's when I'm at my calmest. Um, I'm quoting here my old apprentice coordinator who said I was a keen communicator. I do love to chat, I do love to have conversations and to find things out. Um, as a manager, I was always open to ideas from staff. I always started with yes wherever I could. I wanted to explore ideas and to let them do the same and to develop and to make things better. I do love a process, which is handy in a lean organization. And I'm always looking for ways to make things simpler, even as silly as things as, how do I pack my bike into my car, things like that. Um, because of the rejection sensitive dysphoria, I'm very mindful about how I impact people and what it does to them. Probably, if I'm really honest, because I'm thinking also about how that might come back to me. But that, and that also makes me very eager to please. I will go out of my way to look after people. Things that are kryptonite is making me finish things that really aren't interesting to me and that aren't in my wheelhouse. That's going to create some anxiety for me, and it's that's not going to work well for either of us. Which doesn't mean I never finish anything. Of course it doesn't. But making me finish every single thing isn't going to work. Learn when to take things off me and give it to somebody who's better able. I will tend to use gut instinct and experience rather than data. So I do have to check myself and really go back through that loop and make sure that, what my gut is telling me is actually backed up by facts and data. My nature is to fail. I like to fail fast and learn. I'm that kind of, let's see what happens. But you don't keep banging your head. You learn from it and you make it better. If things are nice and calm and relaxed, then I'm not comfortable. I'll go and create some things to do because I'm not happy. I will waffle on. I will get sidetracked. I will lose my thread. I will sometimes over process things. I'll put processes in where they don't need to be. I will take on too much because I want to please people and kind of avoid that rejection sensitive piece. And if you want me to engage, do not give me a big document to read because I'll scan read it and it won't, most of it won't go in. Okay. So kind of want to move on and I want to think about, to Lee's point earlier, ADHD isn't the same for everybody. So please don't take this as a definitive guide for how to create a more inclusive environment. This is kind of what would work for me. There are many other things that would work for others. And what I would encourage you is to encourage yourselves as leaders and your leaders, and think about, what are the resources they need to let everybody who turns up to work be the best selves every day. Um, you know, you need to understand what that would mean and what reasonable adjustments you can make. I'm not saying, you need to bow over to everything, but if it's a reasonable adjustment, why wouldn't you make that? If it was a person in a wheelchair, you put a ramp in. So, what's a reasonable adjustment for your neurodivergent population? And also, don't be the old me. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not true. Um, you know, Open your mind to the possibility that it is a thing, it is impactful on the individual, and try and help them. So, few thoughts there. In terms of communicating and information processing, sometimes you need a bit of time to process something. You might need to follow up in writing to make sure that you've been understood. and talk about what the communication preference is with the individual. Do they want writing? Do they want a conversation? Do they need an action or an action tracker? What's the thing that will help them? And what might that format of that take? Might it be a diagram rather than a written SOP? Um, and also provide a little bit of context. If you send a message to somebody with ADHD and say, "Can you come to my office in half an hour? I need a quick chat," they will probably catastrophize that and think that they're in for a telling off or something of that nature. When you might just be wanting to say what a great job they've done. So provide that little bit of context, a couple of extra words to just help them understand what that is. We talked about prioritization, be clear about what you're expecting from people. If you've given them a load of things to do or there's some ambiguity in there, help them with that. Be cognizant of the fact they will have a poor working memory. Encourage perhaps the use of time blocking to make sure that they focus on some of the tasks they need to do. If you're going through a period of change, then they may need a little bit of time, a bit of a heads up, maybe ahead of others, if it's possible, on changes to just kind of understand that a little better. You may need to train and retrain people. They may have learning preferences different than everybody else's. We'd already talked about, don't give me a big document to read. Give me something to listen to. Give me a video to watch. Let me do the thing. They'll get a far better impact than a document, and try and keep things simple. And that's a good lesson for anything in life, keeping it simple and process focused is good lean behaviors. Speaking of which, create those processes, make it super clear how we want to do, then you won't procrastinate. There are apps and tools out there that are helpful for neurodivergent, and pairing people up, if you're into your bell bin, put a plant with a completer finisher, because they'll get a load of ideas, some of which are great, and then somebody will take them on and do them. In terms of workload, going back to prioritization again, make sure you've got your eye over all of that. They will want to people please. They will take on too much, or I will certainly, and certainly embrace the strengths that they have. Don't always focus on the weaknesses. A, from an RSD perspective, or B, you'll just get much more out of them. There may be some equipment and environmental things you need to think about. For me, noise cancelling headphones have been great. Low visual noise areas. If I've got a screen in my, a comm screen in my eye line, that'll catch my attention. So those low stimulus areas. Things like tactile surfaces. Some desks you can have kind of tactile areas on them. Hyperactivity helps. So things like fidget cubes, things like that. Timers are helpful. Time blocking's helpful. And finally, performance. You do need to performance manage everybody, absolutely. But think about when you do it. When's that person at the best? Where's the right location to do that? Contracts with them on how they want to receive the feedback. Think about that RSD. Forgive the French, but it's that kind of shit sandwich thing. The bad news sits in the middle of a couple of bits of good news. And be really clear about what the goals are and what your expectations are and the outcome you're looking for with real clear, concise, smart goals. Okay, so nearly done, everybody. So a few final thoughts, and these are my personal views, but if you think you are, if any of this is starting to resonate and you're nodding your head and thinking, that's me, then think about a diagnosis, think about the help you'll get by understanding better, and people you live and work with understanding you better. I talked to somebody at work a while ago, and they said that they thought their child had ADHD, but they didn't want them to go through a diagnosis because they didn't want them labeling. What I said to them was, think about the labels they're getting because they haven't got the right label. Think about what I was called. I was lazy, I was inattentive, I was a daydreamer, I was trouble. They were all the wrong labels. They didn't get me the help I needed. Um, what you need to do is get your kids the right help by giving them the right label. If you do have ADHD, then if you haven't already, I'd encourage you to have a discussion with your manager about what you need to be the best you at work. Don't give yourself a hard time for what you can't do. Celebrate what you can. Explain yourself. You don't need to apologize. Um, and also learn to forgive yourself and laugh about some of the things that you do. Um, you know, and I've told a few people about my diagnosis, and I've had a few people go, "Well, we're all a bit like that, aren't we?" Don't confuse sometimes forgetting somebody's name or walking into a room and not remember what you went in for, occasionally with that being all pervading all of the time. That's the difference. You know, take the time to educate yourselves, to share that with others. My personal experience of medication has been amazing. It's not for everybody. Seek professional advice if you think that that might work for you. If somebody close to you's got ADHD, take the time to learn more about it, find out how it impacts them, but also share with them how it impacts you. And kind of have that understanding of each other. Maybe give a little bit of thought about that RSD thing. Sometimes my wife can be super blunt with me, and it hurts. And we laugh about it a bit more now. But before I knew it was a thing, it was painful. And also don't be scared to remind them about things. Have you rung your mum this week? Have you done this? You are going to wash those dishes, aren't you? Kind of conversations. If you manage somebody with ADHD, again, get yourself educated. Think about how they're impacted and how you can help them. What are the reasonable accommodations you could make? What are the right working environments for them? Take the signs, say thank you. That rejection sensitive dysphoria thing is real, and it will mean so much more to them. And talk to your HR. What is your inclusion and diversity policy? What are the reasonable accommodations that you're able to make? And is that really helping you get the best out of people and them to be the best selves? And if none of the above apply to you, if you sit in the outside of that Venn diagram, then do take the time to learn a bit more. Amazing that you've turned up today. It's a great start. Thank you. If you hear somebody say we're all a bit like that, challenge it. You're not. Some people say, well, it's trendy now. Everybody's getting it. Also not true. It's just more accessible now. Um, and if people do share the diagnosis, it can be quite a big deal. So, be empathetic, be supportive. So that's the end of that. What I did want to share was when I saw Lee's slides at the beginning, was a bit of a challenge really for us all. And it starts with this, we've just heard that there is a skill gap, and it's quite a significant one in the industry. So we don't have enough people. But then, if 1 in 7 people in the UK are neurodivergent, but you've got 1 in 4 people in construction that are neurodivergent, you've got a much higher concentration than is in the general population. Half of those have got ADHD, and a third of those have picked that industry, construction, because of their ADHD and their neurodivergence. And most of them, 70, 80% of them feel well supported by the peer group and feel well supported by the organisation. So you're doing some fantastic things to attract people and to keep them in that industry. But, and forgive me, that you may want to fact check these, but, these are some quick Google searches for me. But, 25% of people in prison have ADHD. 33% of people with ADHD are currently out of work. There are 700,000 neurodiverse kids who will probably add to those statistics. And my wife worked in special educational needs at a high school, and she shared with me that kids that kind of fall under that spectrum of neurodivergence often just get put in a room together so they don't disrupt the rest of the school. And you'll have somebody with autism who needs perfect quiet and time to, really focus in on what they're doing, sat next to somebody who's got ADHD and is stimming and shouting and waving his arms around. Nobody's getting anything out of that. And they will leave school with little or nothing and probably add to that population of jobless and, God forbid, prison or worse. So, there's a massive amount of people out there who would love to have a better career and have an opportunity of a career. And I read, and I know it's not you guys, but I read the neurodiversity in construction report that the CITB put out there. None of the 4 recommendations talked about reaching out and working with those populations and engaging with them. And that just feels like something to reflect on and a missed opportunity. And I think that's probably where I'm going to leave and shut up now and hand back to you, Lee.
Oh, that was incredible. I'm conscious that we've got some issues with the chat function and people coming off mute, but I've had some comms via my private chat, and what you've said today, I think we need to applaud you first of all for your bravery to speak up. That stigma. We're both at a stage in our career where we can say speak up, and we've been some of the lucky ones, haven't we? So thanks so much for giving it your insight. Reflecting a bit further, if you look at different optics, I've been on a very similar journey, leaving school with no GCSEs, getting thrown out of colleges, but finding something I liked and getting a first class honours and master's levels quals. So anyone on this call now, if you're a line manager, make sure you your team, you bring them into the right environments and you give them the right enabling and accommodations to function. But similarly, if you are a parent and your kid is an amazing child but has some issues in classes, for example, let's not try and shape them to conform. Let's develop that person to be the best that they can and be a happy child by following things that interest them and their dreams, for example. So I really wanted to just thank you, Paul, with that. As a CLB, we do have support here. You can see we have an assist program. We've got mental health support. If you want to reach out to me or B via the meeting chat for any comments or feedback to pass back to Paul, please do so. And again, we're all there to support with any follow-up questions that you may have. But I think we'll probably wrap it up from there. And again, Paul, from all of us on the call, thank you so much for your time today. I really hope you found it therapeutic more than painful. So yeah, thanks so much, and look forward to people signing on for the next session.
Yeah, and if anybody does want to reach out and talk to me offline or find me some questions, then I'm sure B or Lee can put you in touch, or we'll do that. But more than happy to talk to any of you.
And ironically, I've got to rush off to something else now because I've overcommitted today and I don't want to get in trouble. So we're going to go and close the call. I'm sure, Paul, you've got a meeting in 30 seconds as well. But thanks for everyone to join us today, and see you at the next episode. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks all. Bye.
Thank you.